Hello, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. Today, I'm filming my last historic video before the release of Alchemy, which should be coming out in actually just a few hours. I wanted to do one last video before the format really shakes up because of the changes that are coming to Magic Arena, for better or worse. We'll see in a few days, I suppose. So I picked a super special deck. I'm calling it SIMIC Mega Ramp, and this deck is just magical. I'm going to do a bit of a deck tech in this video. If you just want to see me play some games with it, as always, annotation up in the top right hand corner, or there's a link down in the description below. Jump over to that other video and check it out. It should be a whole lot of fun. So I play a lot of decks in Historic. Most of them turn out just fine. Sometimes they fall a little bit short of expectations, but once in a while I come across one of those magical decks. Something about the deck just really connects with me and I fall in love with it. And I think that's what I have with this deck right here. I'm going to go over all the cards in the deck and hopefully you'll have a better idea of how the deck works. So it is a ramp deck, so we have a lot of ways of increasing the amount of lands we have on the field. All of them are in this column right here. We have 4 copies of the Arboreal Grazer, a great 1 CMC 03 with reach. The reach is very relevant to stop some pesky flyers that are trying to get at our Planeswalker. And then when the Grazer enters the battlefield, I get to put an extra land from my hand onto the battlefield tapped. Next, 4 copies of Explore, simple card. This turn I may play an additional land and I get to draw a card. Hopefully I draw into a land, get it onto the field, and ramp away. Next, Growth Spiral, a little bit different from Explore because it is instant speed. It is also a little bit harder to cast as it is 1 green and 1 blue, but I get to draw a card and then I can put a land from my hand onto the battlefield. And finally, 2 copies of the Dryad of the Elysian Grove, a 2/4, which is a pretty good body for blocking. It is a 3 CMC Dryad. It says I may play an extra land each turn, and lands I control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. That can be a little bit important because we do need to make sure we have all of our colors, but for the most part, we want this card for the extra land drop each turn. Now, how do we get a whole bunch of lands into our hand? Well, we do that with Mulch and Renin 7. Mulch, pretty sweet new sorcery. 2 CMC, it says reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all land cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest in your graveyard. Are we going to play this card and go 0 for 4 once in a while? You better believe it. But once in a while, we're going to be hitting 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 lands with Mulch, and we'll be able to put out all of those lands with some of the other cards that we have in our deck. Renin 7 does a couple of things. This is one of the main win cons in the deck. It's a 5 CMC Planeswalker. Hopefully I can get this onto the battlefield by turn 4, sometimes turn 3 if I get really lucky. The +1 is pretty powerful. Reveal the top 4 cards of your library. Put all land cards revealed this way into your hand and the rest in the graveyard. It's just Mulch. That's all that card, the +1 is. It's the same thing as Mulch. It's awesome. Then the 0 ability, put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. I haven't found myself using that ability too much because I want to be putting the lands onto the battlefield with another thing, or I won't have many lands in hand because I've ramped into Renin 7. Then the -3 is probably the most commonly used ability. Create a green tree folk creature token with reach, and this creature's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. This thing is easily a 10-10, 15-15 when I'm playing this deck. It gets out of control real quickly. It is pretty susceptible to removal. Things like Fatal Push and Bloodchief's Thirst kill the tree folk very cleanly. But if they don't have those answers in hand, they only have like damage, lightning strikes, damage-based removal. They're going to have a hard time getting the tree folk off the field. And then the -8 is an emblem. I've actually never got this. Return all permanent cards from your graveyard to your hand. You get an emblem with, you have no maximum hand size. It might come up, but I think for the most part, we want the +1 and the -3. There is another Planeswalker in the deck, Karn the Great Creator. 2 copies of this. We do have a sideboard full of yummy artifacts that Karn can go and get with its -2. So Karn does a couple of things. First of all, it has a passive ability. Activated abilities of artifacts your opponents control can't be activated. Can be very powerful at shutting down some artifacts in the format. It's not a huge thing in Historic, but it might come up from time to time. Shuts off things like Azorius or Orzhov artifact decks, for example. Next, until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its mana value. Not playing any artifacts in the main board, as you can see, but over in the sideboard, we do have a number of artifacts, things like God Pharaoh's statue. If we reanimate that with the +1, it becomes a 6/6. It could win a game here and there. Mostly, I want Karn in the deck because of that -2. You may reveal an artifact card you own from outside of the game, or choose a face-up artifact card you own in exile and put that card into your hand. So we use that -2 and we can go and get any number of cards. We can go get a treasure vault. If we're struggling on lands, it's happened, I go and get this land. I can go get God Pharaoh's statue, taxes the opponent's cards, and also does damage to the opponent every up and step, rather. Sky Sovereign, pretty cool vehicle. If I need to fly over some creatures, it also does 3 damage every time it enters the battlefield or attacks. Can really take out a nice wide board if the opponent has that. Golos, if we need to just spin the Golos wheel. Helm of the Host is the really fun one because I can put this on the tokens that Red and 7 makes, or I can put it on another card that I'm going to talk about in a second. I'll come back to Helm of the Host. Sorceress's Spyglass, if I need to shut off some activated abilities, maybe they have a Planeswalker on the field that's really annoying. Sorcerer's Spyglass comes in, name that Planeswalker, and no more of that. Ratchet Bond for a little bit of removal, and then Tormod's Crypt for some graveyard hate. And then the last card that I want to really talk about in the deck is Cultivator Colossus. This is the reason to be playing this deck. It is a 7 CMC plant beast with trample. It says Cultivator Colossus's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. Again, just like the Ren and 7 Tree Folk creature token, it gets out of control easily. 10-10, 15-15s. I've seen over 20 at times. Because of the next ability, when Cultivator Colossus enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. So if you find yourself with like a Ren and 7 on the field and you're about to slam a Cultivator Colossus, well, you use that +1 from Ren and 7, put a whole bunch of lands into your hand, or maybe you play out a mulch, get some lands in your hand, and then slam the Cultivator Colossus, play out all those lands, basically draw out your deck, have 20, 25 lands on the field, and start slamming in with a giant plant beast. Now, the cool thing is, with the Helm of the Host, you equip that onto the Cultivator Colossus, and suddenly they have a trampling beast coming at them with haste, and things just get out of control. I've done it a couple of times. It's so much fun when you can pull it off. Now, there's a little bit of protection in the deck with Pact of Negation, 2 copies of this. This card has come up several times and has really saved me. The downside of this card is at the beginning of your next upkeep, you must pay 3 blue. If you don't, you lose the game. So you can't use this too early, but usually you'll have that 5 mana by turn 4, turn 5 at the latest, hopefully, and you should be able to deploy a Pact of Negation to stop some disaster from happening. Again, this card has been fantastic. I was a little bit apprehensive about it at first, but turns out it is great. Now, we are playing a land-oriented deck. That means we have a whole bunch of lands that are important in the deck. These lands over here are your typical SIMIC lands, not a big deal, but we are playing things like 4 copies of Castle Garenbrig. This thing gets us up to the Cultivator Colossus a little bit earlier. Playing a couple of copies of Lair of the Hydra. We're going to have a whole bunch of excess mana at times. You better, load this up once in a while and start slamming face. And then playing 4 copies of the World Tree. Really important because if we control 6 or more lands, our lands can add 1 mana of any color. This is really important because we're also playing another card that is super important to the deck and just super fantastic. I didn't know this card existed until I found this deck, and this card has impressed me immensely. Port of Karfell. Now, it says that it enters tapped and it only taps for blue, but it has a wicked activated ability. Pay 3, a blue, and 2 black, sacrifice Port of Karfell, mill 4 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Doing this at instant speed on your opponent's end step to bring back a Cultivator Colossus is great fun. It hits the field. It still gets its enter the battlefield ability because it is entering the battlefield. It's not a cast ability. You get to start playing out lands, drawing a whole bunch of cards, and suddenly on their end step, they have a 20/20 trampling plant beast to deal with. We're going to be able to swing in next turn, and it's just glorious. I absolutely love everything about Port of Karfell in this deck. Whoever conceived this idea was a genius. The rest of the deck is pretty simple. 3 copies of Mystical Dispute. They've come in some matchups, especially against like Jeskai Control. they can be pretty important. And then 2 copies of Alrund's Epiphany. That's from the original deck. I haven't found myself bringing the Alrund's Epiphanies into the main board in any games yet. Maybe I will replace them with more artifacts in the future, but maybe I'll find a need for them in some matchups. I'm not exactly sure about the Alrund's Epiphany. And then the last card in the deck is 1 copy of Bojuka Bog. I can bring this in instead of one of these lands in games where my opponent has a pretty strong graveyard strategy going on. Oh, and Blast Zone. Sorry, 2 lands. Last one, Blast Zone. If my opponent is going wide with a lot of annoying creatures, bring this in, a little bit of extra removal in those games where I need it. So that is the deck. Again, this thing has been super fun. It's a little bit expensive because you do need to craft at least 8 mythics with Cultivator Colossus and Wrenn and 7, but just these 2 in one deck really makes things awesome. So I am definitely going to go jump into a few games. If you want to check out those games, of course, click the link, head on over to that video where hopefully the deck performed as I'm expecting it to. Thanks for watching this video. Take care for now. See you in the next one.